Good evening, and thank you for listening to the Night Watchman, where we discuss the esoteric, the unseen, the unusual, and the strange. We see everything. And tonight we're talking to Alissa Keller, and she's with Museums of Hopkinsville. Thank you for joining us here on the show tonight. You might want to correct me, fill me in on what your title is, and correct me on the Museums of Hopkinsville name.
Well, first, thanks for having me. And the full name of the museum, we're the Museums of Historic Hopkinsville Christian County, because we operate two museums and represent both the city and the county. And I'm the executive director of the organization.
Okay, cool. And thank you again for joining us tonight. So one part of your museum is dedicated to Edgar Cayce, the topic of our discussion tonight. So briefly, what is the connection? Who is Edgar Cayce, and what is the connection to Hoptown?
Oh, well, Edgar Cayce, he's known by a number of names as the sleeping prophet, the father of holistic medicine, also as really one of the kind of the founders or the kind of masterminds of the New Age movement, and he was a psychic. Edgar could go into a self-induced trance and tap into a universal source and a universal knowledge while in that trance, and could answer questions that he most certainly did not know the answers to while in a waking conscious state. And his connection to us here in Hoptown in Christian County is he was born and raised here. Edgar Cayce was born in the little community of Beverly, which is about 7 miles south of Hopkinsville proper. And he was born on March 18th, 1877, grew up in the country, then moved into town, and lived here really in his formative years. And then for about 2 years did run a photography studio and a psychic diagnostician's office in Hopkinsville as well.
All right. Wow. So he was a photographer by trade for a while. Now, the sleeping prophet. So I understand. I mean, he would go into, and my research, and I've read a couple of books on Edgar Cayce years ago, but he would go into a trance, basically a sleeping trance, which I think alarmed some people because they would come in to see him, those maybe early on days, or people who weren't familiar yet with who he was. And this is kind of pre-television. He died pretty much as the advent of television. So, and definitely before the internet. But he would go into this sleeping trance and then start talking. And I think he did about 14,000 of those, I think. Does that sound right?
14,000 that are documented, yes. So more than that, but 14,000, a little over 14,000 that are documented. They called the readings when he gave them, and a stenographer would be present to write down everything that was said during the reading. And those are all indexed and cataloged at the association he founded in the 1930s in Virginia Beach.
Okay, yeah, I think he lived in Virginia Beach for a while.
He did.
But when he would go into a trance, do you have any information on what were the kinds of things he would tell people?
Oh, yeah, sure. So this kind of some background on this trance deal. This is not something that he did his whole life, like as a little kid. There are stories about him as a child being able to do things that other kids couldn't, and being able to do things that were just completely unexplainable and fantastic. One of the most well-known stories of Edgar as a kid was that he could not master one of his spelling lessons one evening. He was practicing with his dad, and he could not for the life of him spell the word cabin. And his dad was getting more and more frustrated with him as Edgar just couldn't get it right. Finally, Edgar asked if he could just take a break. That was it. He just wanted to take a break and rest for a second. And while he did, he laid his head on his book and he kind of dozed off. And when he woke up, he could spell cabin. He could spell every word essentially in the book. His dad would flip through the book, and before he would land on a page, Edgar could tell him what words were on that page and spell those for him. So this was he was starting to realize as a child that he could do things, but didn't know what to do with that. Now, when he is how old? It's in 1901. So he's in his early 20s. Edgar loses his voice. He's working in Hopkinsville at a bookstore. He's everyone's favorite clerk. He's very kind of, man about town, and he loses his voice. And it's not just laryngitis. It's like vocal paralysis. He doesn't talk for 9 months. So extended illness. He walked around town with a pad of paper and a pencil so that he could communicate with people. And this is actually when he became when he started working in photography. He couldn't work at the bookstore anymore because he couldn't communicate well with customers. So he started working for a local photographer in the darkroom, so he could work and not have to interact one-on-one with people. He would proceed to learn photography and become an actual photographer after this. But during this time when he couldn't talk, he was attending a show at Holland's Opera House, which was on Main Street in downtown Hopkinsville. And he'd gone to see a hypnotist. And hypnotism was a big thing at the turn of the century, both kind of in a, as a curiosity, but also as a way to, as a potential medical treatment, just dealing with hypnotism or mesmerism, as it would be called as well. And so he goes to this kind of I don't know if it's like a comedy show, but like an exhibition show for a hypnotist. And he gets pulled on stage to be hypnotized. And hundreds of people are there. And many of them know that Edgar can't talk. So he goes up, he is hypnotized by this, the name of the guy was Hart the Laugh Man. And when the Laugh Man put Edgar under hypnosis, Edgar could talk. But when he woke up, he couldn't talk. And there was a man in the audience that night named Dr. Al Lane. And Dr. Lane was an osteopathic doctor and was living in Hopkinsville. He was fascinated by this and started doing research and started kind of corresponding with colleagues that he knew that were also osteopaths and were kind of experimenting with hypnosis. And he started working with Edgar one-on-one and hypnotizing him to see if they could figure out what was going on. So he, the same thing kept happening. Lane would hypnotize Edgar. Edgar could talk. Edgar would wake up from the trance. Edgar couldn't talk. This is the same thing over and over. So finally, through some kind of correspondence with some of his other osteopaths, the suggestion was given while he's hypnotized, ask the voice coming out of Edgar what Edgar needs to do to make himself better.
The start, really, and the start of kind of what Edgar did right there. So,
absolutely. And so they do it. The way the story is told was it was at the home that he was living in with his family, and his parents were in the room. Dr. Lane puts Edgar into a trance, and while he's in the trance, he can talk. And they ask the voice coming out of Edgar what needs to happen. And this voice, and I'm saying this voice because yes, it's Edgar, but it's really not necessarily. It's like this super consciousness that's coming out of him. They ask what needs to happen, and it says that that the blood flow has been restricted to his vocal cords, and it needs to be restored. And so they're told to loosen his collar, to tell the body to restore blood flow to the vocal cords. They're told that his neck would probably swell and get real red once the swelling went down, to give the suggestion, to tell the body to return to normal, and then to wake him up. So they do all of those things. They loosen his collar, tell the blood, all that stuff, and they watch his neck swell. When it goes down and the redness kind of subsides, they ask the body to return to normal blood flow, and they wake him up. And Edgar coughs up a little bit of blood, and then he talks. And by all accounts, that he didn't speak strongly at first, but he spoke, and he spoke he was fine after that. So this became one of those holy moly, what is this? What can we do? And what can this do to help people? One of the things about Edgar Cayce was that when he gave readings for people, the intention and the goal and really the heart and soul behind it all was to help people be healthier, to help them get better, to help them live more balanced lives. So
now, was he resistant to this, whatever it is, gift or ability? Was he resistant to that? Do you know?
I think so. Here, in the early days, he really didn't know what to do with it and didn't know what it meant. It was different, not something everybody could do, and didn't know if it was going to help anybody, didn't want to hurt anybody for sure, and just kind of didn't know what he was getting into. So he ends up moving to Bowling Green, which is about an hour or so on today's roads, at least, east of where we are. And he opens a photography studio there. And while he's there, it's almost like they're kind of experimenting. He'd had some buddies that would put him in a trance, and they like stick him with pins to see if he'd jump, and so don't really know what the process is, but all the while still keeping in touch with Dr. Lane in Hoptown, and would come home when Dr. Lane had a unique case or something that nobody could figure out. And one of those stories was of a little girl named Amy Dietrich, and her dad was the superintendent of schools here. This is early 1900s, and Amy was about 5 years old, and she had grown and progressed in a very normal, for lack of a better way to put it, way, and then reached a point where she started to regress. So where she'd been talking and walking and communicating and had a favorite toy and all those things, she started to go backwards and couldn't talk anymore, couldn't walk anymore, didn't recognize, didn't call her mom mama anymore, any of that. And as most of the stories we tell about Edgar Cayce and what are called the physical readings, the readings about health, they took her to the doctors and every specialist they could find, and nobody had an answer. And then they call Edgar Cayce. So Dr. Lane's working with the Dietrichs. He consults with Edgar, gets Edgar to come home, and Edgar comes in on the train, and kind of one of the more poignant parts of the story is he's led in the back door of the Dietrich's house because they're not so sure they want people seeing him coming in the front. So he comes in, Dr. Lane conducts the reading in the parlor, and when Edgar wakes up, when he's brought out of the trance, he doesn't remember anything from the trance, ever. Like
now,
when he's in the,
so that was that kind of typical? I'm sorry to interrupt, but was that kind of typical that he didn't remember, or was that?
No, that's completely typiple. Like that's kind of part of the deal. Edgar Cayce was the only person that was always in the room, but never actually got to hear a reading, but he comes out of the trance, and the mother is just, crying and like hugs him and is excited, but, just kind of in quite a state of emotion, because the reading has suggested that whereas a number of doctors and specialists had indicated that this was a neurological problem that was chronic, there was no way to fix it. That his reading indicated that her name was Amy. Little Amy had fallen when she was younger out of a carriage and had hit her back, like right at the small of her back on the bottom step of the carriage. And when that happened, this like wrenched back injury had created scar tissue around her spinal column, and it was restricting blood flow to her brain. And this was the problem that was causing her to regress, and that there were chiropractic adjustments that could be made to her back to help loosen that scar tissue and kind of get things flowing. This is the most hope that this family has been given. Now, Dr. Lane is an osteopath, and I guess they're more like osteopathic adjustments to her spine than chiropractic. The treatment was given, the kinds and the spots and all that needs to happen for these adjustments. Dr. Lane does it, and they give a follow-up reading, and he didn't do it right. So after, I think it took about 3 readings to get him to hit the right adjustment spots. But within days, little Amy Dietrich was calling her mom mama again and was asking for her favorite toy. And Amy grew up, went to college, married, lived a very full life.
Amazing. And it was thanks to what Edgar saw when he was sleeping, or what he said.
What he said, yes.
What he said. So everything that, was this written down at that point? did he have? Now, he had a stenographer or a secretary later.
Yes. So, not this one probably was not written down, if you want to know the truth. And so, how do we even know about it? A biography was written of Edgar in 1942. He didn't die until 45. So the biography comes out about Edgar titled "There's a River." It's fantastic, and so it reads more like a novel with dialogue and all kinds of things. It's really, really well done. But the writer of that was living with the Cayces at the time, so he was getting straight out of the horse's mouth these stories. But as for the stenographer, that's part of the process that takes a while to get used to and to figure out what all Edgar needs in order for these readings to be done well and done right and to be helpful. And essentially, he needs two people in the room with him. He needs what they call a conductor. And the conductor is the one who talks him through the reading, that asks the questions. It's said that when he would prepare for a reading, he would lay down, he would loosen his collar and his shoelaces, and I think the cuffs on his shirts too. And he would put his hands over like his solar plexus, so over his abdomen, and then he would go into this trance, and that the conductor had to watch him because his eyelids would flutter, and if he or she did not catch him right then, he'd fall asleep. So they had to like get him in this like in-between subconscious world
before he went into actual sleep.
Before he went into actual like deep, I'm taking a nap sleep. Mm-hmm. So the conductor was there to talk through the reading and to ask the questions. Now, when the reading was done, it was always done for someone, maybe not always, but typically done for an individual person or a group or whatever it may be. Most readings start with, you have before you the body of Christopher Randolph or whomever it may be. That person did not need to be anywhere near Edgar, but he needed to know where they were. It didn't matter where, but he needed to know where. So it was almost like his consciousness needed to know where to go.
They could be in Chicago, and he would just have to know what street or what their address was.
Correct.
Okay.
And
amazing.
Some readings even open with, it's like the conductor says, you have before you the body of so-and-so, and the source is what it's often called. The voice coming out of Edgar would say, yes, we have the body. And sometimes it would say, would comment on what that person could see out their window or on the pajamas they may be wearing, the clothing they're wearing, on other people in the room with them. And he could be thousands of miles away.
Absolutely amazing. That's just incredible. And he did... Go ahead.
Well, but I'm sorry. But the question of the stenographer, so you had to have the conductor there to talk through the reading. And typically the source only answered the questions it was asked. It didn't often give extraneous information, like it only answered what was put to it. But because the conductor is talking through all of this, and especially with the physical readings, so much of it is so intensely detailed about systems and of the body. It almost reads like an autopsy a lot of times, like going through all kinds of the digestive systems and the circulatory systems, that you had to have someone in the room to write that down. And so this is where the stenographer comes into play. And really one of the last final pieces that gets it all, the Cayce work all wrapped up, is the discovery and hiring of Gladys Davis as the stenographer. And that was done after they left Hopkinsville. She comes in when they're in Alabama. But Gladys proves to be like the soul that is needed to like close the loop and make this all work.
He had moved to Selma, Alabama, and I think he was there for 10 or 12 years or so. Mm-hmm. But let me ask you, were most of his readings, were most of those medical related? Was that kind of what people sought him out for?
Yes, primarily. So of the documented readings, there are more than 14,000, and I don't know the number off the top of my head. It's like 14,276 or so, it's some more than 14, but 14 and some change. And just around 9,000 of the 14,000 are physical readings, so about health. Readings come in a lot of different categories after that. Life readings would be I don't know this for certain, but my assumption is that the life readings are the next biggest chunk. But he also gave readings about technology and about business and about spiritual growth. One of the things that comes out of the Cayce work, once he is in Virginia Beach, he opens a hospital where this was his dream all along. He would give physical readings for people. Then in his own hospital, there would be physicians on site to treat these people. And then Edgar could give follow-up readings to make sure everything was going as needed. And he did open a hospital in 1928 in Virginia Beach, built it from the ground up. And a lot of the funding for it came from a couple of brothers that were stockbrokers in New York City. And the stock market crash in 29 kind of did them in.
So that was the end of the hospital at that point?
Yes. So the hospital, it may have gone on for a little bit after that. And the other thing, the stock market crash was detrimental, but also the lead doctor, the head physician at the hospital was a man named Dr. Thomas House. And then the head nurse and kind of the caretaker at the hospital was his wife, Carrie. And Carrie House was, I'm going to say it and hope it's not confusing, was Edgar's wife, Gertrude. Carrie was Gertrude's aunt.
I'm confused.
Family. Yeah.
That's
at one point I was doing research on Edgar Cayce and I had to draw a family tree because there are bunches of them on all sides. So his wife, so this was kind of, it was family, was working and running the hospital. And Dr. House, Dr. House was from Springfield, Tennessee, but had moved to Hopkinsville, married Carrie Salter, and who was a Hoptown girl, and lived here and practiced here, but then moved to Virginia Beach to help Edgar establish and run this hospital. Dr. House dies, though, in September of 1929. And
so just after the stock market crash, he died.
Just before.
September. Yes. Yeah. I'm sorry. I've got that backwards. Stock market crash was historically in late October, I think.
It was right now. It was
it's actually just about this time of year.
Yeah. And when Dr. House dies, I think that takes kind of a little bit of the wind out of the sails of the hospital in and of itself. And then Carrie moves back home to Hopkinsville. And so with that, and then with the stock market, I just think the wheels kind of came off, and that's when they created, under a different name at first, but kind of settled on the Association for Research and Enlightenment, ARE. And Edgar continued to give readings. He would get mail in and would give readings for people through the mail. People would come visit and he could give readings as well. And it was a member organization. And some of these early members wanted Edgar to give readings for them as a group, so that the initial intention was to see if they could become more psychic. And it wasn't at all to do it as a party trick, but to bolster the Cayce work. So maybe he wasn't the only one, but through these readings, it figured out that that's not what they needed to do. They needed to participate more in soul growth as individuals and as a group. And those readings were for this one group. So like I said, kind of chasing rabbits here, but 9,000 of the readings are for the general physical, public, or for medical. And then you've got a chunk about life readings. You have ones like these that are about soul development. He did business development readings. He did readings trying to locate oil in Texas, and then technology readings too. So he did lots of different things.
Just to be clear, he had no medical background or anything like that. And I don't think he attended college, I don't think.
No, heavens no.
So, and we'll get to the technology part here in a minute because that's fascinating. But back to medical, were those roughly 9,000 medical related, were they deemed to be pretty accurate, percentage wise? There were some, yes, but
overwhelmingly so, if people followed the treatment. Now, I mentioned at the top of this that he was he's also referred to as the father of holistic medicine, because the treatments that came out of these medical readings were easy, and they weren't necessarily straightforward. They were treating the whole body and not treating symptoms, but treating cause. And so the readings may indicate a change in diet. They may indicate an exercise regimen. They might indicate certain herbal treatments or massage therapy, osteopathic and chiropractic adjustments. There were readings that developed, I'm not as good at these things, but like a wet cell device and a radiac. I mean, all these like what seemed like crazy inventions at the time, but are things that were very, more primitive versions of treatments that are used today. And they might involve meditation or taking time to be quiet. I mean, on top of what would be considered more of a traditional approach. And so that was part of the problem. I mean, these were like, in some ways, these could be like overhaul lifestyle changes. And so did they work? Sure, if people did them. Because we all know how hard that stuff is. And also I'm sure it had to have been really fun for someone who had been sick and had gone to doctor after doctor, specialist after specialist, to then contact a psychic and get a psychic reading back and then have to take that to a doctor to help them administer it, So I'm going to guess there was some amount of skepticism, not necessarily for those getting the readings, but maybe from those around them, So overwhelmingly, the treatments were effective if followed.
Okay, interesting. So getting back to which it actually is. I mean, the medical part of that is interesting. And I love the story of the girl with the spine injury. And so that, that was a pinpoint of what to go, where to look, and what, maybe not exactly how to do it, but what to correct for that girl. But for technology, what were some of the big technology things that Edgar Cayce talked about?
Some of this is not going to be as good. My knowledge is not as broad and as deep on this. The one story that I've read the most about were some technology readings he gave kind of as a follow-up for a man here in Hopkinsville who was kind of he was, I think, a local county judge executive and very well-known gentleman in town, but was kind of an amateur inventor at the same time. And he built an airplane in Hopkinsville and flew the thing here. And right at the same time, the Wright brothers. I am not good enough to tell you when the Wright brothers flew the first plane, but this guy flew one here in November of 1911.
Okay, I think that's a couple of years after the Wright brothers.
It's a couple years later.
Yeah.
But very contemporary,
Yes.
And
which is still a feat.
Yes. And I think it was years later that he did some consulting with Edgar Cayce about how to make the plane operate differently or better. And there was some indication that the way the engine worked was different than how the Wright brothers had developed theirs. So I know that he did technology readings for that. Some of the other ones I am not as keen on. A lot of the things he did have technology readings for. What was it called? An auroscope. That's what it was called. It was Edgar Cayce could see auras around people,
like
an aura being like
the aura, the light energy.
Yes.
Sort of? Okay.
Like in the energy field that is believed to surround all people that that's like constantly changing and moving and comes in different, like everyone's aura has a color or multiple colors, and how that shows how what they're like and what in their mood and all kinds of stuff. So Edgar could just do that, but he gave a reading to create what was called an auroscope that so anyone could look through it and see someone's aura. And people tried to build it and it never worked, and no one could figure out why. And it had to do with, I've seen one now where the one I saw was really funny. It was made out of like a printer box, but it was like a box that you looked in, and inside there were prisms that were set up, I think, like as a pyramid, right? And then you were supposed to turn that, like look in the box at the prism, and then outside of the other, you could see the other end of the box, you could see a person. and you were supposed to focus on the prism and turn it. And then as you turned it, you were supposed to be able to see an aura, like the aura would become clear around the person that you were looking at. And it never worked. And so finally, people kept messing with it. And a group fairly recently, I'd say, in the past 15 or 20 years, have figured it out, that what was happening is when it was built and folks would look through it and turn the prism, they were turning the prism too fast. You had to turn it really slowly so your eyes would get adjusted, I guess. And then actually, we at the museum here in Hottown for years have hosted an Edgar Cayce hometown seminar. And one year somebody brought like a homemade horoscope, and I got to look through it. And
did you see an aura?
I did.
Oh, wow.
And you know what? I think, if I'm not mistaken, I looked through it at 2 different people and they were different. So it wasn't just like, I look through this and I see the same color around everybody, but it was a very deliberate action, in that people were more like spinning this thing and it was going too fast. So it wasn't that the reading was wrong, it was the application was wrong. So
interesting. Yeah, sort of just like if you followed Casey's advice, you would gain a healing, and that people were, similarly misusing his device. So, right. But if you used it correctly,
right,
you'd see an aura. Okay. Was that used in?
I don't know what happened to that prototype. We need to get our hands on one of those.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's fascinating. Yeah, but
very cool.
So Edgar never developed that. Am I correct on that? He did not build that. That was a idea or plan?
I think so. I believe that is true. Okay. As far as I know, he did not build it, because I don't think they could ever, get it to work. So I don't know where. Some of what I know about Edgar Cayce, I have read. Some of it I have gleaned. When I started working at the museum, it's almost been 10 years ago now, and I felt real proud of myself that I'd read a book on Edgar Cayce. And then we hosted the first seminar that I was attended, and I realized I knew less about Edgar Cayce than anyone in the room, because there's just so much to know. But yeah, I did the horoscope. That's one of those stories I think that was told to me. So I'm not exactly sure of all the details.
Okay. Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
Now I want to know.
Me too. Yeah, I'm going to find out to see if I can track that down. But so aside from technology, I know Edgar Cayce had some prognostication about the future, maybe things that haven't happened yet. Are you aware of any of those, what those might be?
Well, Edgar Cayce and actual future fortune telling and predictions, it gets kind of murky. And my understanding, from what I've read and from what I've kind of gleaned, and then also from how I've processed what I've learned from Edgar. So Edgar would give readings about what was happening to someone and about like a current state. Starting in the 1920s, often those readings would also include a past state. That's when he got into talking about souls' past lives, and how experiences in a former lifetime were influencing someone today. But one of the overarching themes in all of this is, which we kind of already talked about, not in so many words, is that humans are graced with free will. So just like Edgar Cayce's treatments coming from the health readings worked if you followed them, that's free will. And so a lot of from my understanding, when he gave a reading for someone or for some event or for some whatever, he could recognize, and I'm saying he was just a man, his soul in this super conscious place could access a source and could recognize patterns, is the best way I can explain it. So if these are the influences on this person or event, this is where we are now, and if things keep going that way, here's what's going to happen. But at any point, with free will, somebody could make a different decision. Somebody could change their mind. Somebody could decide to take the road less traveled, or, you know, go left instead of right. And that pattern would be morphed, you know, and changed a little bit.
And maybe in some cases, that's what they would want to do.
Right.
Exactly. To not follow, to basically follow his advice by avoiding whatever he may have spoken in their
sure.
future.
And I think a lot of the health readings that then would also, or the life readings, especially, like, here are the influences on someone. One of the things about the Cayce readings that they get into has to do with soul groups. Is one of my favorite terms. It has to do that souls choose to incarnate together, and so you have like a soul group that if you're really close to someone, you've probably been with them before, and in some way or another. Also, if you have a very like negative relationship with someone, you might have been with them before, and they don't really call it karma is not exactly the word they use. It's karmic memory, so it's not necessarily good or bad, but this like built-in memory. And I mean, I know that I can name people in my life that, like, you know, they walked into a room and I was like, I'm gonna be friends with her, you know. Or like, nope, don't like that one. And you don't know where that.
You're right. Sometimes you just know right off the bat.
I have a friend that I met, and it was so funny. And I've told her this before, but we went to graduate school together, and like our very first thing, we walked into the building, like one right behind each other, complete strangers. And I mean, it was like, okay, well, she's gonna be my best friend through graduate school, you know. And I just knew, and I was right. So
it turned out that way.
But I think with this one of the readings that I've heard about had to do with like a mother had a reading. And you could request readings for other people. And I think she had this reading about her family because it was like her husband, she had a son, and her husband was just like unnecessarily hard on this child, just very, very harsh and strict with them. And it didn't make sense. Like there was nothing about it. The kid didn't seem to deserve such harsh treatment and such discipline. And so she, I guess, was distraught and had a reading about it. And that it came to be that they were all, you know, in this soul group, and they'd been through things before, and that the roles had reversed this time. That in a previous incarnation, today's son had been the father, and he had been very harsh on today's father. Like the father-son, I'm not doing a very good job on this, that relationship had flipped. So he who was the son this time was the father last time, and he who was the father this time was the son. And they were playing out like this same pattern, almost as as a cycle, and as a in
a reversal,
like a revenge almost. And that the kind of like the goal of the reading was to point that out so that they could break it, so that they didn't go through this lifetime and come back again and do it again. And so, so there's that free will again, and to use this as a way to build on the good and the positive, and on what, you know, fuels and strengthens your soul, and to rise above the other.
Interesting. What an interesting person. What, you know, very unusual Edgar Cayce. And to, you know, he made I made a living actually at this, I think, for the better part of his adult life. And
he never got rich off of it, that's for sure. But he, I mean, this is what he did. After he was a photographer, he kind of, different things led him in different ways, and he gave readings for himself, you know, that someone had to tell him what he said when it was over. And it was what his soul needed, and how his soul could develop and grow, was to help people in this way.
Just amazing. Interesting. A very interesting topic, and we may have to come back to this at some point. But, well, hey, thank you. And remind everybody again, you know, what you do at the museums of Hopkinsville, and what you have there for Edgar Cayce.
Absolutely. So the Museums of Hopkinsville, we operate 2 museums, but all of our Cayce exhibit and information is in the Pennyroyal Area Museum, and it is in downtown Hopkinsville in the old historic post office, and beautiful building that we just renovated. Our Cayce exhibit really looks at Cayce the person and Cayce's connection to us here in Hopkinsville. So we do our best to tell the story of Cayce and his work in a fairly comprehensive sense. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of books about Cayce and his work. So trying to distill that into a couple of exhibit panels. Well, more than a few exhibit panels. But one of the things we have in the exhibit is a replica of the couch where he would lay down to give readings. The original is in Virginia Beach, but we have a replica. And so the idea is that people can sit on the couch and look at a kind of a gallery wall, a salon wall of photographs. When he was here, he did work as a psychic, but was also a photographer, like we mentioned. So we have a lot of photographs that Edgar took of Hopkinsville right at the turn of the 20th century. And so kind of getting to see Hopkinsville through his eyes and on that wall. And then we have a number of things that belong to him and to his family. Frankly, very kind of mundane things. Cups and saucers and things from his desk, that kind of stuff. But things that were important and special and really kind of ground him back on earth here with us. A lot of what is said about Edgar is less about Edgar and more about what ARE often refers to as the work. So the readings and what came out of his legacy and what became his legacy. And we really want to remind everybody that who he was and what he did were remarkable. But he was just a good old Christian County boy and grew up on a farm and really took a gift that was, bestowed upon him and made the best of it.
Hopkinsville has been a center for quite a few things, and not just a birthplace and residence of Edgar Cayce, or longtime residence of Edgar Cayce, but there's a lot that's going on in Hopkinsville, aka Hoptown, for those of you who might not know Hopkinsville. Well, thank you very much, Alissa. It was great talking to you.
Well, thanks for having me.
You bet. And we'll probably talk again. Like I said, there's a lot more to Hopkinsville for whatever reason. I mean, just we had the Little Green Men. There was the eclipse. And now correct me, I think, and I was there for it. I think it was 2017.
Correct.
And that was Hopkinsville, Kentucky, United States of America, was the best place to see the eclipse, or the longest duration of the eclipse.
It was the point of greatest eclipse.
The greatest duration, and it was fairly long. I don't recall it off the top of my head, but
I should know it. It was like 2 minutes and 40 seconds.
Yes,
I should know exactly, but it's right around there.
I was there standing on a hill just north of town and in Hopkinsville for that event. But Hopkinsville is some kind of crossroads of some kind. I don't know what better way to say that at some point, but we'll get back to those in future episodes. But
I've had somebody tell me that we're a window area.
A window area. That could be. That's a good way of saying it.
I need to look that up, but he told me that window areas are places where the veil between, the conscious and the subconscious, the natural and the supernatural is just a little bit thinner than it is everywhere else.
Kind of get a glimpse into something esoteric, unseen, unusual, and strange. Well, hey, thank you again, Alissa. And you've been listening to The Night Watchman, where we discuss the esoteric, the unseen, the unusual, and the strange. Thank you, and have a good night.
Yeah. Is that what? Oh, yeah. Oh, I mean, like the Cayce material is deep and wide and runs in so many different directions. One of the things that that I'm going to be reading on, that I've done a program on before, but I've got to do something else, are his readings that deal with the lost continent of Atlantis. Yeah, it's fascinating.